Hey everybody, welcome to 6 Points Church here on YouTube. I'm so glad you clicked on this video and chose to watch this video. This series is about what is the Bible? What is this giant book, this collection of ancient writings? We're not really going to be talking in this series about theology or religion. We're literally looking at the text itself. So the first video is an overview, a 30,000-foot overview of what is the Bible. It's not really one book. It's actually a collection of books, usually bound together. So check out that video. And then second video in this series is the Old Testament. It's the first of two major divisions in the Bible. And it's the Old Testament. It's also known as the Jewish Tanakh. We're going to be looking at the similarities and differences between the Tanakh and the Christian Old Testament. The third video in the series is going to be looking at the New Testament and how that is constructed and contained, why Christians care about it so much. And then the last video is going to be looking at English translations and various types of translations of the Bible. Because I have it under really good authority. This wasn't originally written in modern English. So we're going to be looking at those for our fourth video. I am glad you're watching this video, and I hope it is beneficial for you. Let me know in the comments, are you an agnostic, atheist, Christian, Buddhist, Jew, Hebrew? What's your religious background, if any? I would love to hear from you. And why did you click on this video series to start with? Was it beneficial? Did you get something out of it? And lastly, if you do find this video series beneficial, hit the thumbs up and share it with anyone and everyone. It's free for all. I shouldn't have said lastly. This is actually lastly. If you don't like this video series, by all means, hit that thumbs down button. I'm good with that. I want to hear from you either way. Just let me know in the comments what you didn't like about the video series. And I'd love to hear from you. Thank you. All right. So I don't know if any of you watching this video have read the entire Bible from cover to cover, but the thing is huge, okay? I mean, this thing is massive. Every time I start in Genesis, the very first book, and I try to read all 66 books in order, in sequence, for some reason I usually end up getting to about Deuteronomy and go, yeah, this ain't working for me. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. So this is part 2 of a 4-part series covering on what is the Bible? What is this massive collection of writings? And we are looking at the Old Testament. So the Old Testament is broke down into various sections, and if you're Jewish, an Orthodox Jew, for example, you might know the Christian Old Testament as the Tanakh. However, the Tanakh has some minor differences than the Christian Old Testament in its compilation. The texts are the same; they're the identical texts. However, how they're organized is different. So, in the Tanakh, you have the Torah, which is the 5 books of the law. That's the same with the Christians. We have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. They're also known as the books of Moses, because with the exception of a little bit of Deuteronomy, they're all credited to Moses writing them. Then for the Christian Old Testament, which is the main focus of our video today, we have the books of histories. Now, in the Tanakh, you have the Nevi'im, I think is how you pronounce that. I might be wrong on the pronunciation. If I am, correct me in the comments, okay? But we have the histories. Christians separate Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles into 2 parts each, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. But we start with Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Then we have Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther to round out our histories. And they read like you would expect. They read like history books. They don't generally give a moral stance on what's happening. They just give a historical stance. So what's interesting is First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles cover most of the same events, just from different perspectives, which is pretty cool. When we look at the New Testament, we're going to see that with the 4 history books, the biographies of Jesus in the New Testament, how that works as well. So watch that video too when it comes out. Then we have the books of poetry and prose. Now, the Tanakh has this separated with called the writings as their third main group of section, and theirs is set up a little different than ours. So if you're Jewish, feel free and point out those differences in the comments. I'm not going to point out a lot of those differences simply because I'm not overly familiar with the Tanakh. But we have we have Job, which is pretty interesting. A lot of historians and theologians, scholars, look at Job as being written during the age of the patriarchs. So that's back with Abraham and Isaac during that time frame. And it's a pretty cool read. It's an epic poem. And it's kind of like a bet between God and Satan, and Job's the subject of the bet. So if you're interested in that book, it is definitely worth reading because it reads very distinct in its storyline with this rich guy named Job and his family and all his wealth. And Satan basically says, yeah, he loves you, God, and worships you because of all that cool stuff he's got from you. And God says, yeah, take it all away and see what happens. And then the story unfolds from there. Now, Job doesn't know about this bet until the end of the story, so it's definitely worth reading. And then we have Psalms. Psalms is interesting for a number of reasons. The first reason is it is by far the largest book in the Bible, handedly. It contains 150 individual psalms. These were written to sing, and they span the entire history of ancient Israel. From the leaving the Exodus of Egypt through captivity, and they're all songs meant to be sung. Some of them are congregational songs, but they're all songs. It also is interesting because it has the largest chapter or psalm and the shortest, the longest and the shortest. Psalms 117 and Psalms 119, shortest and longest, respectively. Psalms 117, super simple. Praise the Lord, all you nations. Praise him, all you people. For his merciful kindness is great towards us, and the truth of the Lord endures forever. It's pretty short. It also just kind of rolls off the tongue like it's meant to be sung to tune. So a lot of Christian songs, especially worship songs, come from Psalms. Proverbs is dad's advice, 30 chapters of dad's advice to a son. And then Proverbs 31 is mom's advice. Basically, dad's dead, he's gone, and now mom tells his son, hey, you need to do 3 things. 1, you need to grow up, because dad's not around anymore. 2, you need to stay sober, don't get drunk and do stupid stuff. And then 3, go find yourself a virtuous wife, and this is what she looks for. This is what she looks like. Don't pay attention to any other woman unless she is this picture, unless she fills this picture of a virtuous wife. And then when you find her, make her your wife. So it's definitely worth the read. The other thing about Proverbs is, one thing that I used to do, and sometimes I still do it, is I'll look at the calendar what day it is. So like the recording of this video, it is the 18th, that day of the month. So I would go to Proverbs 18 and read that chapter. Then you'll read the entire book over the course of a month. We have Ecclesiastes, which is kind of a depressing book. It talks about how life without God is vain and everything is for naught. Song of Solomon is pretty cool. You might notice I'm spending quite a bit of time on the poetry and prose. It's because I really like them. It's one of my favorite sections of the Bible. Song of Solomon is notable because, and it closes out this section of books, Song of Solomon is an epic love story between the Shulamite woman and her soldier husband. At the beginning of the story, it's a dueling poem. So it switches perspectives between the Shulamite woman, and she's only known as the Shulamite woman. She's not named. And her beloved. The beloved is not named as well. He's just known as the beloved, or the suitor, or the soldier. And how their romance happens and intertwines. And it's pretty fascinating to read it, because some of the imagery is extremely explicit, okay? Hugh Hefner has nothing on Solomon in the Song of Solomon, all right? If you are easily offended or prone to blushing, this book is probably not the one for you to read, because it's pretty risque. And its imagery there's a lot of bedtime activities going on. Next, we have the prophets, major prophets. They're called major prophets by Christians simply because their books are longer than the minor prophets. Not because they're more important, there's more text. And that is Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Lamentations. Ezekiel and Daniel are usually put into that group too, of the major prophets. Again, it's because these books, these writings are just longer. Most of the prophets did not have very nice things to say to the kings of ancient Israel and Judah. They were a lot more evil kings than righteous kings, which if you read 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, you should get that imagery in your head of these guys were not good guys overall. And the prophets definitely point that out to them a lot. And spoiler alert, most of the prophets are executed. So yeah, if you want to follow God and follow the prophet's example, you're probably going to cross some government officials and get executed, because pretty much almost all of them did. Daniel is interesting because Daniel talks about the end of the world in visions and dreams. And then we have a bunch of minor prophets. I believe there's 8 or 9 of them. It's Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Now that closes out the Old Testament. And with the Old Testament closing out there, we're about 400 years in history before the birth of Jesus. So we're closing out between 300 and 400 BC. Or if you're Jewish, or you might use the phrase BCE, before Common Era. However, both timing conventions, which we talked about in the last video, have the same delineation of the birth of Jesus. So before Christ or before Common Era. Now, the minor prophets, like I said, most of them are executed. Some of them aren't, but they definitely have some downsides. Jonah is interesting. He gets a lot of slack because he was apparently swallowed by a big fish, and everybody seems to focus on Jonah, swallowed by a whale. Wow, that's like a huge thing. Woo! How could that happen, right? Spends 3 days in a belly of a whale. Well, the text doesn't actually use the term whale. It uses big fish. And it's possible that could have happened. There are fish out in the sea that can swallow human beings whole. However, the main focus of that book is, and the writings of Jonah, is not what happened on the sea. It's what happens when he gets back on land. He ends up going to Nineveh, which is a super wicked city, and they end up repenting and are saved. He tells them the judgment of God's coming, and they're saved. And I find it super fascinating because Nineveh was a pagan city. It wasn't a Jewish city at all. It was very pagan. And that's what I find pretty fascinating about Jonah. So each of these books, some of them are very short. Some of them are only 1 chapter long. But they all tell this cohesive story and weave this narrative web of the coming Messiah. And Jesus being that Messiah. When we look at the New Testament, we might talk about that some more. But with the Old Testament, the focus in Genesis is on the origins of mankind, and then it zeroes in on this one family headed by Abraham and Sarah. From there on, we have a super zeroed in microscope focus on this people called the Israelites, or the Jews, or the Hebrews. Excuse me. So, super interesting reads, and we cover all elements of life. The Bible is not rated G. My son was reading a section, I forgot where he was reading, and it was super descriptively gross. It talked about this one mom and her neighbor, also a mom, deciding on which kid they were going to kill to eat. It was so gross. But the Bible doesn't shy away from that. It just simply records it, which is pretty interesting. Most of the time, it doesn't give a moral judgment call. It allows the reader to interpret what to make of it. Also, if you think you or me or any other one is the center or the key main character of the Bible, I got bad news for you. We're not. Matter of fact, the Hebrews aren't even the main character most of the time. It's almost like they're side characters in their own story. The overarching main character of the entire narrative, spanning this 1,500-year period in history, these writings cover 1,500 years, written by tons of different authors, over 30 of them, is God and his interactions with mankind, which is super cool. So let me know, have you ever tried reading the entire Old Testament straight through? How did it work for you? If you have questions, comments, let me know. But this is just that rough overview of what is the Old Testament.